Warning! Kinda Murdery contains adult themes, explicit language, and descriptions of violence. It is not suitable for anyone, and we recommend you stop listening now.
Hello everyone, and welcome to Kinda Murdery, a true crime podcast that's mostly about murder, and always about the strange and compelling stories that arise when the path less traveled twists to darkness, and those who walk its shadows surrender to violence and moral corruption. We have a perilous journey ahead, so thank you for lending me your courage and good company. I'm Zevin Odelberg, and this is Kinda Murdery. I hope you enjoyed my conversation with Anson Maddox on Sunday about the god-awful murders committed by Samuel Little, the most prolific serial killer in American history. If you haven't heard it, go back and listen to it. I really do enjoy hanging out with Anson, and I think he has a lot of good insights into the case. And of course, it's interesting to talk with an excellent painter about Samuel Little, who painted all of his victims. But I'm back on the mic solo today, and I've got quite a story for you. It's a story of pirates, serial killers, and millions in gold treasure hidden, perhaps still out there somewhere today, along the banks of the Ohio River in Illinois. Now, if you're anything like me, when you hear the terms serial killer or pirate, you don't think of frontiersmen, legends of the American West. For pirates, it's shiver me timbers, matey, some old salty Brit who sounds like Long John Silver, and serial killers are people like Jack the Ripper, John Wayne Gacy, or maybe TV's Dexter. Well, it's time to confound those expectations, because today I bring you a story from the decades surrounding the American Revolution, featuring the Harp brothers, America's first serial killers. Now, the Harps were wanton slaughtering monsters who murdered everyone from American patriots to their own children, and they are thought to be responsible for at least 40 murders. In fact, the murderous evil they inflicted on the fledgling American Republic has rarely, if ever, been matched by a single individual or two, with the possible exception, I guess, of Samuel Little, but the Harps delivered a lot more general mayhem along with their murdering. Also, I mentioned Dexter a moment ago, the TV serial killer who kills serial killers. And although they were lacking in Dexter's noble intent or sense of duty, the hideous Harps had a Dexter moment of their own when one of their victims, river pirate captain Samuel Mason, turned out to be a serial killer himself, with at least 20 murders to his name. Just these three men, this unholy trinity of pirates, bandits, and killers, were responsible for murdering at least 60 people in the 2 decades or so leading up to the dawn of the 19th century. And yes, of course I can't forget that one of the three left millions of dollars in unclaimed gold treasure buried somewhere along the banks of the Ohio River. Treasure that might still be there. Now, 2 articles by Kathy Alexander written for legendsoftheamericanwest.com were integral to putting this episode together. As always, you can find all my sources in the show notes. So today, I bring you a story about an unholy trinity of American serial killers connected to buried treasure on the banks of the Ohio River, and also, by the way, there are witches involved, so hopefully I've piqued your interest. We've got revolution, pirates, serial killers, buried treasure, and witches. I'm not sure what other elements I could possibly hope to find in a true story to get you excited if you're not excited now. And if you're not excited now, you're probably listening to the wrong show. But if you know that you're listening to the right show, if Kinda Murdery is exactly your jam, then I ask you to please join me, as together we uncover what truths we can, and solve what mysteries we may. Kinda Murdery's Unholy Trinity, the serial killing trio behind the legend of the Ohio River pirate treasure, that's a mouthful, starts now. Earning the dubious distinction of being the United States' first documented serial killers, Micajah, Big Harp, and Wiley, Little Harp, were murderous outlaws who operated in Tennessee, Kentucky, Illinois, and Mississippi in the late 1700s. Often referred to as the Harp brothers, they were cousins who generally passed themselves off as brothers. Their fathers were Scottish immigrants who settled in Orange County, North Carolina. Now, Micajah Harp was born to John Harp and his wife, while Wiley Harp, actually named Joshua, was born to John's brother William and his wife, Soon after the arrival of the Harps in America, they changed the spelling of their original name from Harp, H-A-R-P-E, to just Harp, H-A-R-P, like the instrument. Now, growing up near each other, the boys soon took up the nicknames of Big and Little Harp, as Wiley was much smaller than Micajah. The two left North Carolina in 1775 for Virginia, intending to find jobs as slave overseers. So the Harps were clearly a morally dubious duo from the absolute get-go, since as very young men they set out to make their fortunes in their chosen career of being slave overseers. Yikes. But they never got to be the overseers they dreamed of being because the American Revolution interrupted their career. Perhaps unsurprisingly, the pair sided with the British. But their interests seemed to be more in violence and criminal activities than in any sense of patriotic duty, or reverse patriotic duty, depending on how you look at it. Along with other like-minded irregulars, which in this case I think can be shorthanded to along with other violent sociopaths, as opposed to like-minded irregulars, maybe irregularly low empathy quotient, I suppose. The Harp brothers were guerrilla fighters for the British, thrilling in burning farms, raping women, and pillaging the American revolutionaries. When Little Harp attempted to rape a girl in North Carolina, he was shot and wounded by Captain James Wood. However, he survived. In 1780, the Harps joined the regular British troops and fought in several battles along the North and South Carolina borders. The following year, they left the army and joined a group of Cherokee Native Americans, raiding settlements in North Carolina and Tennessee and continuing their pillaging. It was clear that the Harps were not at all beholden to some larger cause, they just were looking for opportunities to murder, rape, and steal, and set things on fire. And for psychos like Micajah and Wiley, a late 18th century war was a literal playground. The brothers decided to take revenge on Captain James Wood, who, as I had mentioned earlier, had previously shot and wounded Little Harp when Little Harp tried to rape a girl. For their revenge, they kidnapped his daughter Susan Wood and another girl named Maria Davidson, and forced the women to become their wives. The Harp brothers, the brutalized women, and 4 other men began to make their way to Tennessee. During a trip, a man named Moses Doss had the audacity to be over-concerned for the brutalized women. For his concern, he was killed by the Harps. The group then settled in the Cherokee Chickamauga village of Nickajack, located southwest of modern Chattanooga, Tennessee. For the next dozen years, the Harps, along with their, quote, wives, unquote, lived in the Native American village. During that time, both captive women became pregnant twice, and the fathers, the Harp brothers, cousins, killed their children. These guys were so messed up. After the British surrendered at Yorktown in 1781, the Chickamauga and a breakaway band of Cherokee continued to make war on American patriots, and the Harps were only too willing to help them, fighting in the Battle of Blue Licks, Kentucky on August 19, 1782, and other more minor skirmishes. In September 1794, the Americans planned to take the offensive against the Native Americans in Nickajack, but somehow the Harps got wind of the attack and fled before the Americans wiped out the village. The Harps and their women settled down at a new camp nearby where they stayed for the next 9 months, once again pillaging local villages in Tennessee. Then by spring 1797, they lived in a cabin on Beaver's Creek near Knoxville. That same year, Little Harp married a local girl, a minister's daughter named Sarah Rice, and the other 2 women that had been living with them for years now became the wives, again in quotes, of Big Harp. Just over a year later, in late 1798, the Harps would begin their murder spree, one of the most violent in the nation's history. They first killed 2 men in Tennessee, one in Knox County and one on the Wilderness Trail. Then by December, they'd moved to Kentucky, where they killed 2 traveling men from Maryland. Unlike most outlaws, they seemed more motivated by bloodlust than financial gain, often leaving their victims disemboweled and filling their abdominal cavities with rocks and then sinking them in a river. Jeez. Next up, a man named John Langford, traveling from Virginia to Kentucky, turned up dead, and a local innkeeper pointed the authorities to the Harps. The criminal pair was then pursued, captured, and jailed in Danville, Kentucky, but they managed to escape. When a posse was sent after them, the young son of a man who assisted the authorities was found dead and mutilated. On April 22, 1799, the governor of Kentucky issued a $300 reward on each Harp's head, which inflates up to about $7,300 today. Fleeing northward, the Harps killed 2 men named Edmonton and Stump, Then, when they were near the mouth of the Saline River, they came upon 3 men who were encamped and killed all 3. The pair then went to Cave in the Rock in southern Illinois, the stronghold of a river pirate named Samuel Mason. In the meantime, the posse aggressively pursued them, but unfortunately stopped just short of Cave in the Rock. Along with their 3 wives and 3 children, the Harps holed up with the Samuel Mason gang, who preyed on slow-moving flatboats along the Ohio River. Earlier in his life as an honorable man, Samuel Mason served as a militia captain in the American Revolution. Later, however, that later being a little before and around the time that the Harps camped with him, he would turn pirate on the Ohio and Mississippi rivers and lead highwaymen along the Natchez Trace Trail. However, although the Mason gang could be ruthless, even they were appalled by the actions of the Harps. After the murderous pair began to take travelers to the top of the bluff, strip them naked, and throw them off the bluff, the Mason gang asked them to leave. The Harps returned to eastern Tennessee, where they continued their vicious murder spree in earnest. In July 1798, they killed a farmer named Bradbury, a man named Hardin, and a boy named Coffee. Soon, more bodies were discovered, including William Ballard, who had been disemboweled and thrown in the Holton River. James Brassel, whose throat was viciously slashed, was discovered on Brassel's Knob in Kentucky, and another man named John Tully was also found murdered. In south-central Kentucky, John Graves and his teenage son were found dead with their heads axed, and in Logan County, the Harps killed a little girl, a young slave, and an entire family asleep in their camp. In August, a few miles northeast of Russellville, Kentucky, Big Harp killed his infant daughter by bashing her head against a tree because the baby wouldn't stop crying. Big Harp would later say that that was the only one of all the murders he committed that he regretted. Jeez, these Harps. That same month, a man named Trowbridge was found disemboweled in Highland Creek. And when the Harps were given shelter in the Stiegel home in Webster County, the pair killed an overnight guest named Major William Love, as well as Mrs. Stiegel's 4-month-old baby boy, whose throat was slit when it cried. When Mrs. Stiegel screamed at the sight of her infant being killed, she too was murdered. These guys are just like the absolute worst. What the hell? The killings continued as the Harps fled west to avoid the posse pursuing them, which included Moses Stiegel, whose family, as I just mentioned, the Harps had killed earlier in the month. While the Harp brothers were preparing to kill yet another settler named George Smith, the posse finally tracked them down on August 24, 1799. When the posse called for their surrender, the two sped away, but Big Harp was shot in the leg and in the back. The posse soon caught up with him and pulled him from his horse. As he lay dying, he confessed to 20 murders, and Mr. Stiegel slowly cut off his head while he was still conscious, which, considering that Big Harp had slit Stiegel's baby's throat just for crying, as brutal as that sounds, I have a hard time blaming him. Later, Big Harp was hanged on a pole at a crossroads near Henderson, Kentucky. For years, the intersection where the pole stood was called Harp's Head. In the meantime, while the posse was otherwise occupied, exacting terrible and deserved vengeance upon Big Harp, Wiley Harp escaped and rejoined the Mason Gang pirates at Cave in the Rock. And the mention of the Mason Gang pirates is a convenient segue because it's time now, I think, to take a little break from the Harp story and talk about a man whose own story is nearly as incredible, though not nearly as horrible, as the Harps. And that would be River Pirate Captain Samuel Mason. Now, I'm sure you've guessed by now when I mentioned at the top that this story included 3 serial killers. I'm sure you guessed that the first 2 were the Harp brothers, Micajah and Wiley Harp. We know how Micajah died, beheaded and hung up at Harp's Head in Kentucky. Last we heard, Wiley escaped the posse and went to hole up with the Mason gang at Cave in the Rock. So before we hear the rest of Wiley's story, and how it intersects with Samuel Mason, I think it's time that we give Mason a spotlight of his own. Samuel Mason was born in Norfolk, Virginia, to a distinguished family on November 8, 1739, and raised in Charlestown, West Virginia. He married Rosanna Dorsey in about 1767, and the couple would eventually have 8 children. In 1773, he moved his family to Ohio County, West Virginia, and during the American Revolution, he became a captain of the Ohio County Militia of the Virginia State Forces in January 1777. he was given command of Fort Henry on the Ohio frontier in present-day West Virginia. In the summer of 1777, while colonial soldiers to the east were fighting the war for independence, Mason feared attacks by the Native American allies of the British. On August 31st, 1777, he was proven correct when a band of Native Americans from several eastern tribes attacked the fort. Initially, they fired on several men who were outside the fort rounding up horses. When Mason heard the shots, he gathered 14 militiamen and rode to their rescue. This, however, was exactly what the warriors had hoped for and quickly ambushed the rescue party, killing every last man except for Captain Samuel Mason. The captain, however, was severely wounded and escaped death by hiding behind a log. He was soon rescued and recovered from his wounds to command Fort Henry for 2 more years. In 1779, he moved to Washington County, Pennsylvania, where he bought a 500-acre farm. In July of 1781, he was elected Justice of the Peace and was named an associate judge just a few months later. In 1782, Mason appeared to be successful, as he paid taxes on his 500-acre farm, 2 horses, 4 cows, 6 sheep, and 4 slaves. So what happened to cause American revolutionary, Fort Henry captain, gentleman farmer, Justice of the Peace, and judge a series of descriptions that could not possibly be more upstanding law and order pillar of the community? What happened to cause Samuel Mason to become a notorious serial murdering river pirate? Where the heck did he hide all that gold treasure? And how exactly, beyond occasionally harboring them at Cave in the Rock, does his story intersect with those bloodthirsty pieces of human garbage, the harps? Well, if you want to find that out, you'll have to tune in this Sunday for Part 2, the thrilling conclusion of Unholy Trinity, the serial-killing trio behind the Ohio River pirate treasure. And please, don't turn the show off just yet, because before we go, I wanted to take a quick moment to remind you about the free 3-digit lifeline number 988 that you can call anytime, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, to receive immediate counseling for substance use, mental health, or suicidal thoughts. Please program 988 into your phone right now. And God forbid, but if you find yourself in acute crisis, please don't hesitate to call it 988. And please always do remember that the world is a better place with you in it. Now, I'm not the right person to reach out to if you find yourself in really acute, extreme crisis. I'm not qualified to help you with that. But if you're having a hard time, or you'd just like to share your story, if you'd just like to connect with someone, talk about your life, the challenges, what's unique about it, if you're disabled, if you feel like your experience is different than most people and you'd like to share, please don't hesitate to reach out to me, kindofmurdery@gmail.com, @kindofmurdery on all social media, or you can call the Kind of Murdery hotline, 888-687-3379. That's 888-MURDERY, 888-MURDERY, where you can share about your life, your feelings, or a Kind of Murdery story of your own that could inspire an episode of the show. So yeah, please don't hesitate to reach out to me. I'm here, I care, and I would love to connect with you. Remember, come on back this Sunday for Part 2 of Unholy Trinity, the serial-killing trio behind the Ohio River pirate treasure. And don't forget, it's a true story, and it also has witches. Serial killers, treasure, pirates, and witches. So get on back here on Sunday. See you soon. I'm Zevin Odelberg, and this has been Kind of Murdery.